Hi, so today we're going to talk about what I call the drive to oblivion. What is this? It is what we see all around us today, that people are giving themselves over to chaos and to all forms of retreat from life. You know, we see it we're going to talk about it in terms of the pathological conditions that psychotherapists are confronted with on a daily basis. We see it also in other types of societal problems and also certain global, international problems that we're seeing today. We're going to talk about the need that people have to surrender, right? Now, sometimes we're surrendering to something that's not healthy, and sometimes we see people that are surrendering in a way that is healthy. What is this drive to oblivion? It comes from a natural tendency in all human beings, regardless of race, of color, of nationality, to submit and to give in and to give themselves over to something bigger than themselves, to a cause, to some type of a religion, to God himself. Everybody has in him that need to surrender to something bigger than himself, because deep down everybody knows that you just can't handle the problems of life on your own. Now we're living in a society today that tells us and expects us to be able to do that. We're living in a world where we're expected to be able to stand on our own 2 feet and be able to fight our own battles, and through the power of our own reasoning and the power of our own hands, we're supposed to be able to go out and compete in this marketplace and to be able to deal with all of the uncertainties and doubts and worries that we have. We're supposed to be able to deal with all of our inner conflicts that we have about being successful or failing, about being superior to other people, which is sometimes a neurotic drive that pushes us, or feeling like we're inadequate and inferior to other people, which is another form that neurosis can take. People today are dealing with all kinds of issues of feeling as though they've failed in love relationships or failed in business, or cannot deal with the inner conflicts and urges that prompt them on to get addicted to certain substances or pursuing things that are also not healthy, like lust, alcohol, drugs, crime. All of these issues have become in some ways solutions, in quotes, that people use to be able to lessen their pain. Now, how does that work? Well, if a person feels that he can't deal with the issues of life that are pressing on him, and he's got too much mounting up that he has to deal with, then if he surrenders his problem, if he surrenders himself, he surrenders his life, so to speak, then he's also not going to have to feel those problems. Now, there are many levels to how this can work. Obviously, the most extreme level would be suicide. Okay, and we're going to talk about extreme cases later in this year. But we're starting off now by talking about the normal sort of called, so to speak, neurotic personality of our time, of our age, and how the person is getting more and more alienated from who he is, more and more alienated from his true potentials and his true abilities, and therefore not able to produce and contribute to his family and to his society in the way that he was created to do. Every single psychological difficulty that we encounter today has in it some element of this wish to submit to something greater than oneself. And if by default a person is not able to submit any longer to God, because God is now in a sense taboo, and God is no longer a socially acceptable entity in which a person can submit to and become one with and draw strength and hope and confidence from, coping abilities to deal with the facts of life, the hard facts, the essential facts of life, such as aging and such as illnesses and such as ultimately passing on. If a person cannot surrender and become one and be nourished by God as he was for centuries before, then that natural inclination to connect and yield to something outside oneself is going to lull a person into connecting to dark-sided things, to things greater than him, to be sure, but things that are not good, things that are not wholesome, things that are not healthy, and that will never, ever enable him to actualize his abilities and to accomplish and produce and contribute the way he was meant to. So the people today have lost, for the most part, that healthy outlet of being able to connect to God, being able to connect to the Torah, being able to connect to a way of life that worked for millennia. And it's only in the last 100 years or so that we see an epidemic of problems, psychological and psychiatric problems, so severe in many cases that never existed before, and problems that didn't exist, social problems and psychological problems that were quite rare, even 200 years ago, but that our rabbis anticipated would exist in our generation and wrote about in their books. Quite uncanny. So, a person, now, so this need to connect is there. Everyone knows deep down, unconsciously at least, maybe not consciously, but unconsciously, everybody knows that you can't deal and cope adequately with all of the challenges of life just on your own. You need to connect to something more. So, the resistances we spoke about, that the resistances is that one will be ostracized, that one will be left out and and almost looked at as a fool, as somebody who is naive, childlike, or even primitive, but we need to help people to come back to our way of life. Mainly the way we help is by showing them that it is a legitimate option even in today's modern world. And that by believing in God and in Emuna and in the Torah, that we have a type of happiness and a type of confidence that they don't have. And we're able to utilize our potentials more. Why? Because we don't have the potential on our own. We can only get it by giving up. It's part of human nature to want to do that. So, we have a situation today where if a person doesn't have cultural sanction or acceptance to join into some type of a thing that's going to make him feel bigger and part of something larger than himself, then he's got to find something, anything at all. So we see people getting into drugs, and we see young people who are wandering around, exploring other religions and looking for spirituality in questionable places. We see people who are willing to make seemingly making certain personal sacrifices, but really those sacrifices are not, they're not healthy, all right? Because really when a person, let's say, decides to be a suicide bomber, right? He's going to sacrifice his life. Is he doing that for the cause? Is he doing that because he is intrinsically a giving person, a person who's capable of being selfless and really caring about his cause or his religion? No, a person who is sacrificing to something that is going to cause destruction in the world, that's going to involve violence or murder, right? Then it's going to hurt people. This person is only submitting and allowing himself to give up his own life because he wants to end his life of misery. He wants to find a quick, easy way of putting an end to his own inner conflicts and his own feelings of inadequacy and his own feelings of inferiority and his own worries and sense of emptiness and meaninglessness to his life. He wants to check out. And that's the easiest way to do it. And if he happens to live in a society, in a culture that sanctions that type of behavior and even encourages it, then it becomes easier for people to join in and make that kind of masochistic surrender. If it's masochistic, then it's, if a person is going to be giving in just to hurt them, just to end their lives, that's a sacrifice that comes from weakness, not from strength. A person who sacrifices himself based on strength is a person who has the ability to give to other people. He's a person who has the capacity, a mature adult capacity to love other people. He's a person, or she is a person who can give of herself in love to a spouse, to a child, to a cause, to a community, or to the world. This is true self-sacrifice based upon strength, based upon the healthy values, and this is the type of this is something that will contribute ultimately to the world. Sacrifice that's based upon mass murder and blowing oneself up or making attempts to hurt other people and even looking forward to being shot or taken out. This isn't something that will ever contribute anything to the world because it's coming not from faith, it's not coming from a true belief in the cause, it's just an expedient, if you will, way of checking out of life. The deep unconscious belief in there being something greater is not there. So now, when people are involved in self-sacrifice, it's different than the type of retreat from life that I was talking about before. This becomes sort of a default option where people, for example, develop the unshakable idea that they must have some type of organic illness. The idea that, every kind of disease that a person could have, you have it, she has it, whatever. right? The person is living in a life that's dominated by worries about illness and about disease. The life becomes totally consumed by running to the doctor and getting medical tests and procedures and reading about various conditions and speaking about those and going from one therapist to another. So the whole life has basically been sacrificed, while this person is on this whirlwind, right? This is a form of what we might call masochism, of a person who is leading a self-defeating life. Again, the person is, at the core, the person is expressing that need, as we said before, to connect to something, right? To connect to something bigger than herself. Well, in this case, she has. But what she's connecting to is something that's never going to help her. It's just going to keep her in a perpetual Gehenna, if you will, a perpetual hell on earth. Without the true connection, without a connection to Hashem and His Torah and His true way of life. It's easy to get lulled in, once again, to these types of worries, and they become expanded, and they take a person off guard, they catch you off guard, and they take you off and expand exponentially, right? The pain that such a person goes through of constantly worrying about disease is not as bad to the person, actually, as the pain of having to deal with the underlying worries and conflicts that they have that give rise to these symptoms. But the problem is the person's stuck. Because how is the person going to deal with those underlying conflicts without a God to help? And because the person intrinsically knows that it's not possible that after you've gone to therapy 1 time, twice, 3 times, 4 times, I don't know how many times, that ultimately it's not getting better, a person sort of begins to lose faith in the secular scientific ways of dealing with these things, and just basically submits and surrenders to the illness itself. The person begins to think that he or she is intrinsically weak and just unable to cope with life. The person begins to think that there's some biological defect in him, or in some cases some moral defect in him that just does not allow him to participate in life. I knew somebody who, the moment that any difficult situation would arise, fantasized that he would have a serious illness and saw himself lying in a hospital bed, people visiting him, giving him love and attention, bringing flowers and gifts. This fantasy actually would soothe him and reduce his anxiety. Now, some people actually take the next step and enact the fantasy. And they actually put themselves in a situation in life where they're acting that fantasy out. A person who makes a decision early in life that he's incapable of pursuing a normal career, incapable of raising a family, of marrying, of taking on the challenges and responsibilities that most of us take on. This person can see as an option to that a life of crime, a life of peddling drugs and committing crimes, and even begin to feel that this is an alternative world that he can live in that is, in a sense, a legitimate alternative because he has no choice. He he can't do it the regular way. Or a person who makes, goes forward with a, something other than heterosexual relationships. That person has sort of, in a sense, retreated and surrendered and say, okay, no, it might be possible for other people, but it's not possible for me. So the person just sort of gives in, lets go, and ultimately develops an entrenched and firm belief that this is how they were created, and this is what they were meant to do, and this is really this is their only option. When a person has reached this point, it's fruitless to try to argue with the person, because the person is so strongly wed to those beliefs and no longer is blocked. He's totally blocked and unwilling to consider any alternative. Any alternative is going to put the person in touch with conflicts and inner pain that they don't feel equipped to deal with. So the only alternative becomes surrendering and letting go. A person who is, I know a person who lives in a penitentiary. He has spent the majority of his life living in prisons. Why? Because he feels that it would be impossible for him to live, and he consciously says this, it's virtually impossible for him to live in the outside world. Why is that? Because his experience in the outside world put him in touch with his conflicts about being able to compete in a marketplace and to achieve academically and to manage to deal with human relationships. Very difficult challenges ongoing in the early part of his life. No one there to help him. No one there to provide him with guidance or support or alternative ways of thinking. No connection to faith and something that would inspire him or give him hope, or allow him to realize that he does have another purpose, a higher purpose that he's just not seeing at the moment. And the person just spirals down into an abyss, into apathy and depression, and ultimately into submitting and connecting to the dark side of life, to problems, to pathology, to pain, to perversions of different types. Perversions that even create pain or seek out pain. But it's not the pain per se that people are looking for. People with problems, people with neurotic problems, no more want to experience pain than the rest of us. But the pain is something that they pay, that's the price they pay. It's the price they pay for this submission. It's the price that they pay for relinquishing themselves. To relinquishing themselves to something that can't work, as opposed to relinquishing themselves to something that can. That built-in necessary human need to nullify and relinquish ourselves and to connect ourselves in oneness to spirituality, to God, to hope, to morality. These things have to go somewhere. If they don't go positive, they're going to go negative, as we've mentioned. A person can give up and give over themselves to anger, to aggression. And then they are basically serving that God, the God, so to speak, of anger and aggression and hostility and violence. A person can retreat from life and give themselves over to serving the God of obsessive thoughts and compulsions and rituals and filling your whole day, God forbid, with all kinds of rituals that push life out of the picture. This becomes a form of worship. It becomes a form of connecting oneself to something unhealthy, but something to get out of their own misery. They're substituting one form of misery for another. They're substituting a misery that is perhaps more general and more inconvenient, a misery of hopelessness and helplessness, rather than feeling a misery that's more sharp and current and more personal, that has to do with themselves. When it has to do with me, when it's my success that's on the line, when I'm the one who's being evaluated, then it's more painful. But when you enter into a world where you no longer expect anything of yourself and you no longer care if anyone else expects anything of you in total or in any specific area, then it's just sort of more of a numbing, perhaps, or a generalized pain, if you will. So we need to understand that the alternative is to make Emuna, to make a life of faith based upon values, a viable option. We have to show through our personal example that it's okay to study books about faith, to study books about God. It's okay to talk about these subjects too. If you're in a book discussion group, why not introduce an Emuna-based book into that discussion group and be the first person in the group to open up the subjects that people don't normally talk about. And give your own personal examples of how faith has helped you in your life. When you're willing to talk about your own experiences and share those experiences, then people who are currently caught, in all kinds of conflicts and difficult situations, and who've given up on themselves to various degrees, can get an inspiration and can start to consider alternatives. And when and there's nothing more convincing than your own success, than your own happiness, and how this is working for you and helping you. It's a very important thing for people to actually see, especially people who are in, who don't look like me and who don't work for yeshiva, but people who are more out in the world, doing business, for example, out in the world, and, doctors, lawyers, all kinds of people who are people of faith. I know people that have introduced, lawyers who've introduced Emuna into their law firms, by having some type of a short class during the day, or breaking to pray, or inviting the guys from work, to hear a lecture, and participate in, a question and answer period and things like that. This makes, this is what's changing lives, But we're living in a day and age where it's so unconventional and considered to be so off. It's so off-putting to some people, to bring these subjects up. What do you do in a situation like that? What do you do if you were to bring up Emuna and engender hostility in return? Well, the answer there is to not bring it up. Because if a person is going to react that way, then there's enough other people to go to, enough other people to speak to about it. Save your strength, save your energy, and find people that would be willing to debate with you, perhaps. They may not accept, fully what you're saying right away, but there is at least the potential for that person to come back. A person who's fallen even very deeply into the oblivion, into the abyss that we spoke about earlier, can be ignited with the hope of faith, of Emuna. For example, the person that I speak to in prison, who was actually even in solitary confinement, began to be willing to talk about these subjects, possibly because he had hit the bottom, because there was nowhere else for him to go. And having all that time in his hands, and having to deal with some of the other also painful realities of prison life, he was open to talking with me about Emuna, to reading about Emuna. And subsequently, he's made some amazing changes in his belief system, in his orientation to life. But if a person is, so we have to keep our eyes open for those windows of opportunities where people, even with, say, a drug addiction, it's gone around the revolving door of addiction so many times, and for some reason now, God is opening up a window of opportunity for that person. That person now is somehow more open, more ready. Or the person who's been caught in the web of domestic violence. Maybe the person grew up in an environment of spousal abuse, child abuse, and is now acting that way in his or her own family. Something happens, and there is that moment of truth, that moment of opportunity, and you're there. Or you can provide a book or a CD, or you can provide a phone number so that the person has somebody to call. You can call us, have somebody to talk to. That person changes, the family situation changes. You've saved not only one person, you've saved the whole family. And you've saved perhaps the future generations that are going to come from that family with one CD, with one phone call. By sponsoring somebody for one consultation, one coaching session. So, the world has never been in a darker time. Anybody with eyes can look and see for himself what's going on here in the world today. And yet, a person with Emuna is not depressed by it. It's not depressed by the situation, the political situation that we're in today, the global situation that we're in today, which all, by the way, has come as a result of people, human beings, needing to submit and give in to something. If not something good, then something not good. Right? Fighting and conflicts and machlokas and violence. So a person with Emuna is not going to be offset by these things, not going to be discouraged by these things. Because a person with Emuna knows that all of these tests and all of these, wake-up calls that we're getting now in the world are coming from Hashem, coming from God, and that the only purpose for which they're being sent is to give us a more extreme wake-up call, to come back to the true oneness, to the true submission that we all need to make, to the true self-sacrifice and relinquishment of self and ego nullification that we all need to make, which is to be one with Israel, to be pro-Israel, to be connected to faith, to one God that helps everybody, who's our divine creator and parent, if you will, to all mankind. And through this, through connection to God and to His Torah and to His way of life, I personally have been privileged to see many, many examples of people who were so deep into the other stuff, so deep into that stuff, been miraculously pulled out of the abyss, and a new clean slate, wiping the slate clean, and a new way of life meriting a new life, a new chance, a fresh start. So we're talking today about on many levels. We're talking about people who have, in a sense, the neurotic difficulties, obsessions and compulsions, worries about illness, hypochondriasis, people who are involved in addictions, lust addictions, substance abuse addictions, and all of these things, again, have the same root of an ultimate retreat from dealing with reality and giving oneself over to the Yetzer Hara, so to speak, to the evil inclination that just sucks a person in, lulls a person into these things. And we're talking on the other end of the scale of more severe situations where a person becomes so ready to check out on life that they have suicidal thoughts, or ultimately commit suicide or homicide. But there are so many people that are just living these quiet lives of desperation, thinking and fantasizing about their own demise, or about checking out in life. One person is was getting so to speak, getting strengthened by the idea that he could retaliate against his abusers, in this case his parents, by killing himself and purchasing a grave where he would want to be buried and not where his illustrious family buries their members. I mean, this is the extent to which a person can go mentally to find some type of, in quotes, soothing or comfort, rather than dealing with life on life's terms. By being out there and dealing with the realities and knowing that we can with God's help, the person checks out and doesn't feel anything anymore accept the pain of checking out, which is, of course, very, very painful. Very, very painful. So, but not as painful as, for that person, as the idea of remaining in there, hanging in there and dealing with life on life's terms. So we have to work to help people to be able to pursue healthy goals. We have to be willing to, really it all starts with working on ourselves, working on our own faith, our own ability to hang in there and to get the help we need if we need it, and the support we need it, and to find the right role models. Because that's the way that you're going to contribute, that's the way that you're going to help people in your sphere of influence. And that is to become a person of faith yourself. A person who, and you'll feel better. You'll feel better when you make that leap, and you'll have like a different brain. A brain that will work on seeing that there are things greater going on than what our little tiny bit of reasoning can tell us, and that by connecting to it and seeing it in the everyday events of your life, seeing God's hand, seeing divine providence in your everyday lives, is going to give you the strength to be able to work on yourself and to be able to work out your inner conflicts. Things are going to come up, and you know they're going to come up. As we said at the beginning, life is full of challenges, and there are certain, we might say, normal and expectable facts of life that are going to occur as we age, as we go through the life cycle, as you move from one stage of life to the next. These central facts of life will rear their heads, and yet you'll be able to deal with them, because you will feel as though you're not alone. You will feel as though God is with you, that you have a peer group that shares your values, you have your belief, you have your devotions, your study materials, you have your identification in a world that can enable you to deal with any possible human situation or condition or problem or obstacle that comes up. You'll have the solace, not always the peace of mind, and not always an easy, comfortable ride, but you'll have the inner solace and security of knowing that there are ways of coping, and that you will always have an answer. You will always have a solution to any situation or difficulty that arises in any area of life. So, when you have that, when you work from that basis, then you have the answer. You have the existential answer that all of the philosophers have been looking for and writing about, but offer no solution. They can tell you what the problems are, but they can't give you a solution. Right? Because if God is not a viable solution, if believing in God just means that you have a medieval mentality, or that you are, or that it's some type of opiate, right? Or considered some type of drug, right? Then it's not an option. It's a sad commentary but if we look at our world, this is what happens when God is not an option. When the true, living, one God who created heaven and earth is not an option, then he has, so to speak, no choice but to go according to his own rules and allow the world to see what it will degenerate into without his influence, without a connection to him. So we should merit to be able to find him and to come close to him, and by so doing influence others to come close to him, and to join together with others in heralding in a new age, an age of Emuna, an age of belief, where we see the coming of the Messiah. May he come speedily in our days and build our holy final temple once and for all. Amen. See you next week.